Hey channel, Fernando from SkyFi Audio. So last week I brought you a vintage SAE system from the 1970s, and I made mention of this one. We've been assembling this particular series for about 6 to 8 months. It's taken quite a bit of effort to get it all working brilliantly, and today's video is going to cover these 5 pieces, the 01 series from SAE. We're going to talk about all the buttons, the design philosophy, what makes this such a cool system, and we're going to look at the front, we're going to look at the back, we're going to look at the sides, and I'll show you the vintage system in case you didn't see that video. It should take about 15 to 20 minutes, so if you've got that much time, I'm going to take a deep dive into this really cool system. Before I go any further, if you're a fan of the channel, please subscribe. I've noticed in YouTube analytics that a lot of you, although you're watching the videos, you're not subscribed to them. It helps keep us motivated, so I'd love it if you give us a thumbs up and a subscription. That way we keep bringing these videos to you. All right, jumping right in. So SAE essentially began sometimes in the 60s. The first series was the MK series, which was a 1970s product, and that's the one from the video I mentioned earlier. And it generally accepted that SAE had about 7 series altogether. The MK, which ran in the 1970s, the 00 series, that's where all the components started with 2 digits and ended up on 00. I don't have any of those pieces yet, and that's the target for my next SAE system that we'll assemble. Then the 01 series, which is what I've got here. Well, mostly. I've got 4 components from the 01 series, but this tape deck here is actually from the 02 series, which is considered a little later, more of like late 80s. But I targeted this C102 because it's a cooler machine. It's got a more consistent form factor. It's the same size as the 101 series. And it also has a really neat trick with this drawer here that I'll show you a bit later. For all practical purposes, this is a 101 series except with a cassette deck, which I cheated a bit. So 01, which is what we've got here, first from the 80s, and then 02 was from the late 80s. It's an inferior line. The tuner is a lot simpler, the preamp is a little skimpier, the amplifier is not as cool. So it was more of a budget line. I believe it was made overseas versus here in the US. From there you went on to the X series, which was sort of like SAE's attempt into the super high-end audio. And then there's a professional series from the 1980s, and then there's the series 2 from 75 to 85, which is more of like prosumer, pro audio equipment. So why did I put this system together? And really it's mostly aesthetics. I've been an audiophile all of my life. SAE was a brand I knew, mostly from advertisements. I never really owned a piece of equipment from them before until 6 to 7 months ago. But I've always loved the look of it. I wasn't thrilled about the build quality once you take a look inside, but I've noticed now that I've gone a little further that really varies quite a bit from series to series. So I've been pleasantly surprised with the build quality and the sound quality of their equipment. But look at this thing. It's absolute work of art. And now that we're far away from the 80s, the further away we get, the cooler this stuff looks. I mean, look at all those buttons and lights and handles, and it's just the kind of stuff that I love to see. Let me give you a bit of a couple different views of it. You gotta realize in 1980, most of the stuff had switches and rotary knobs and things. So for SAE to dive deep into the computer controlled world was pretty ahead of the time for them. In contrast, let me walk over to the Mark series. Which is a generation, 2 generations before that. It looks something like this. I'll put a link to this video below in case you want to watch it. Let me go back. Also worth mentioning that the 02 series, besides this cassette deck, they had a pretty vast array of products. They made at least 1 or 2 receivers. They had a CD player as well. That was the early days of CDs. and a fairly wide product range. In the 101 series, so the 01 series, this was pretty much it. Obviously, I'm missing the cassette deck that goes with it, but there were a couple of amplifiers, but this was pretty much all of it. So I've assembled it here with a pair of Bowers & Wilkins speakers also from the 80s. Not a great match. Probably should have done something American, but these just got finished being restored. So it was kind of handy and convenient to just hook them up into the same system. And they do sound pretty good. These are amazing speakers. We've sold a ton of them over the last 3 years. They come in looking a little rough. We clean them up, fix the drivers if they need it, and a really wonderful vintage speaker that we love here at the shop. So let me jump right in. I'm going to go piece by piece and give you a couple of, go over the buttons and functionality. Starting with the top, I've got the T101 tuner. It's a fairly no-frills, simple tuner. It does have a lot of cool lights on it. I mean, look, we've got signal output strength, VU meters here. We've got the signal strength for the reception. We've got multipath. It runs pretty hot in terms of output. I can see that radio stations easily overwhelm its output levels, but it works really well. It's a nice tuner. I think the only service we had to do to it was replace the battery so that we could maintain the presets on it. There are not very many relays in this, and let me tell you about the relays in SAE. If you're a technician, you know exactly what I'm talking about. These are all computer controlled, meaning that the buttons don't really do much other than activate a relay, and those relays are located much further in the back of the unit, close to the inputs and output jacks, exactly where you'd want them, because you don't want the signal to have to travel all the way to the front panel just to reach a knob. It's a lot of traveling through a lot of noisy, critical environment. So SAE realized that the advantage of computer control, other than being super cool, was to limit the signal path, or the distance and the complexity that the signal had to travel to get to the potentiometer. So they used a bunch of relays. And they are gold-plated relays, but we've noticed on this equipment, at least in the 101 series, that they do tend to fail. So when I say the tuner only actually didn't need to have its relay service, is because the tuner only uses the relays to switch between AM and FM. That's the only place in them, and that actually stayed working pretty well. On the preamp, unfortunately, we had to go in really deep and replace just about every relay in the back of it. They're not serviceable. We got them from some place in Israel, I think. It was quite a bit of labor of love. Definitely not worth the effort in terms of what the value of the equipment is, but in terms of a full system, it was worth the effort, because by rescuing the preamp and putting a ton of labor into it, we were able to complete the system, so that was worth it. The EQ, I believe, needed 1 or 2 relays. The amplifier was in great shape when it got here, and the tape deck needed to be restored. So here at SkyFi Audio, we go through every piece of equipment. I would say that these receive what we call a light service, where we took care of all the necessary things. They have not been fully restored. That's when we go in and do almost gut the unit and replace any component that has any possibility of aging. But these did receive a nice light service, and they're working really, really well. So I deviated. I was talking about the tuner. Sorry about that. So 8-memory tuner, AM, FM, great display. One of the things I noticed right away is that when I put it in manual tuning, the steps are actually odd numbers only. And my colleague Ben explained that it makes complete sense, because there really are no radio stations that are even-numbered radio stations. You think I would have noticed that after being alive and using FM for so many years. I guess I was used to seeing all the numbers in tuners, but SAE took the shortcut and skipped all the even numbers. So pretty cool. Not much else notable on this tuner. We've got here a mute and a blend, mono and stereo, and then narrow DX. Not much else. Cool chassis, like everything from SAE, really high quality extruded aluminum faceplates, painted steel bodies. A little hard to get into them. Didn't do conventional cover. You actually have to take the sides off in order to get the top cover off. All right, not much else about the tuner. Let me move on to the cassette deck. Cassette deck is a work of art. Absolutely love this thing. Check this out. It is mounted on a drawer, of all things. It's a one-direction cassette deck. That's all you've got in it. And it's much like a CD player. where you drop it in from the top. A bit uncommon, but not unheard of for tape decks of this era. I serviced an 80's tape deck, which I think was made by Braun, that had a very similar drawer system, which I dug. And I think Marantz had one as well. It adds quite a bit of, vulnerability. That was exactly what I had to service on this machine. I had to service the drive system for the drawer. It is its weak point, but it's definitely worth it. Oh, the other thing I noticed is that you can actually operate the cassette while the drawer is open, which I also like. Here I'm hitting the play. So let's leave that open for now and go over the rest of the features. So up front we've got the tape detection and then the general transport controls. Oops. I want to stop the music to make sure YouTube doesn't tag this. Let me just turn it back on. I'm going to lower the volume and hit play so you can see it work. A couple of things I noticed when I was going through it. First is that whenever you stop or fast forward, depending what mode you're on, if I was, for example, I've got two modes. I've got a mode which measures, I guess, elapsed time from the last play. Because the second I fast forward, it goes back to 0. Pretty neat. And then I can go back to just overall tape counter mode, which stays active regardless of whether I'm fast forwarding or not. All right, so here are my display and counter controls, metal and chromium oxide selector switches, whether I want auto or manual mode, Dolby noise reduction, standby, and here are my record levels. These are the only sliders in this entire system. Kind of glad that they did sliders. This would have been a lot more complex and a little more difficult to operate if it wasn't a slider. The conventional C101 is actually a typical door, vertical door on a tape kind of machine and double the height. So that's why I opted for the C102. Not much else about that worth noting. Let me check my notes to make sure I didn't miss anything. Nope. All right, moving down below, I am at the P101. This is the heart of the system. This is the computer direct line preamplifier. So digital front end in order to control all the relays and all the functions that are located inside. The volume is a push button style, so as I push it up, it counts up, and it seems to go in weird increments. Let's see. Oh, it's measuring in dBs, that's why. So I'm able to go, let's go to the bottom. I'm able to go from 0. So single push of the button, 21, 22.5, 24, so it's 1.5 dB increments per push. It has a pretty neat phono section built into it. The moving magnet you can actually set through switches, but the moving coil has auto gain function, or the impedance is done automatically. So that's kind of a neat feature. And I'm surprised, well, this was right around the cusp of the CD being launched, so I'm glad that there's a phono section in here. If it had been designed just a little bit later, they would have probably omitted the phono section. And there's no reference to any CD player. The inputs are labeled tuner, video, and tape. That's pretty much it. So we've got 2 line levels, we've got a full tape loop, and then we've got 2 phono inputs separate. In the middle, we've got facilities for reversing the stereo signal, turning it on and off, and going mono, which is neat. It's almost like a 3-way toggle. Here are the balance controls, and if you can see, I can manipulate just the left channel. I can offset it to get the proper balancing. There it is, back to normal. Okay, then we've got some phase inversion here. Apparently this is to allow you to connect a stereo amplifier into a full mono amplifier by inverting one of the outputs. Kind of a neat feature. I've never seen that in a preamp before. The speaker outputs, this would control an external relay box that would control the speaker outputs at the amplifier. So you would feed the amplified signal through another piece that they make, and then you would be able to control speaker 1 versus speaker 2 at the push button, which is cool. We got mute and then standby. And then a headphone jack located right here in the middle. All right, another thing you'll notice is there are no tone controls on this preamp. They've left that out to their equalizer, the E101, which is just below it. So no tone controls in here. Good quality overall. It's a glass fiber board. Other than the faulty relays, we found everything else to be in pretty good shape. The power supply does get a little hot and affect some of the components around it, but overall, not a bad design. And the same casing and form factor as the rest. Okay, moving on to the equalizer, the E101, just below it is a computer direct line parametric equalizer. I read online that actually SAE invented the parametric equalizer, which was surprising to me. Good bit to know. It's very unusual in form factor. A typical SAE equalizer would have had 11 or 20 bands with sliders that we're used to, typical faders, but here they went all in with the whole digital front end control thing. So it's divided into low bands and high bands, essentially here, and the controls duplicate for the low and the highs. So it seems like the low has got facilities to go from, my lowest setting here is 20 hertz, and then if I go all the way to the top, this covers all the way up to 1500 hertz. And then the high side can go from 15 kilohertz at the high end. Let me go all the way back down. I think we're, so all the way to 20. So that's 200 or 2000. Yeah, 0.2 is 200. So from 200 to, there's 1000. Yeah. So pretty good overlap between the low band and the high band. I'm gonna have to double check that. I'm not 100% sure I'm reading that right. So you set your frequency, then you can set your bandwidth, and then you can set your level here. So a little bit more complex to operate, not as intuitive as your average equalizer, but at least it's keeping with the whole sort of design intent from SAE. The other notable thing about this equalizer is that it has memory sets. It's got 10 memory locations, so you can actually set 10 memory locations for both the low band and the high band, and then recall them at a push of a button. So that's really the fundamental benefit over a conventional slider equalizer that you'd have to kind of reset everything manually. Moving on to the amplifier, this is their biggest piece. The 501 is a pretty powerful amp. This is 250 watts per side, and it's pretty typical of stuff from this era. I made note of this when I reviewed the other system. Their naming convention takes into account power for both channels summed up. So this is a 500 watt amplifier, but it's really 250 watts per side. It's a dual high resolution amplifier. That's what they call it. So dual, I imagine, means that it's a dual mono design, and high resolution just means exactly that. It's got your typical SAE VU meter showing idle and 0.6 watts all the way to 250 watts. Unfortunately, there's no way to recalibrate the meter, or at least set it for dual use. Let's say it'd be nice to have a button here to switch the scale between, let's say 25 watts and then 250 watts. But considering this was all done digitally, they could have done that nice and easy with just a couple more chips. But nevertheless, it's a pretty cool amplifier, and they did give us pretty small increments at first, so we do get you used to the full resolution of the amplifier. We've got here, it's not only to, let's say, the fifth line before you get to the 1 watt output. So very cool display on it. And let me play so you can see it move around a little bit. I'm just going to play for a little bit. Sorry about that. I hope I didn't blast your ears, but there are so many freaking buttons on these things, it's hard to figure out what to push. I suspect that if this was my everyday system, I'd be really used to exactly where every button press is. I was talking to one of my guys here about this, that you walk up to the unit and it's almost intimidating. There are so many things to push. And the writing's the same and the buttons are all the same size, but I bet that if I had this at home for a couple of days, it'd be second nature. You'd just walk up to it and know exactly where everything is. So I've also lowered the lights so you could get a better look at all the lights and LEDs that are happening right here. I hope that's a better view for you. All right, now let's take a look at the back. All right, I've undone all the connections so we can get a better look at the back of these units. Now, it looks a little intimidating at first, but there's really nothing out of the ordinary here. If you've connected any sort of system before, there are really no surprises here. Starting from the tuner, if you remember, that's what we've got at the top. We've got our main outputs here. Standby and control. This must be to link these together. And then standard AM, FM, 375 ohm connections for the antenna and the AM antenna. Now going down below, I've got the cassette deck just below it, and here we have got the in and out again for the standby, so I imagine that you link these two together. And then typical input and outputs for recording and playback. Moving back down, we've got the P101. This is the preamplifier. Now we talked about the dual inputs for the phono, and here they are. We've got the moving coil with the auto calibration or setting, and then the moving magnet where we can set the resistance between 2247 kilo ohms, actually no, between 22 and 47, and then the capacitance between 400 and 200. I take that back. So the resistance is 22,147, and then the capacitance is just 400 or 200. We've got the two line level inputs. External processor, this is where the equalizer gets connected, a tape loop here, and then two sets of main outputs, including the phase markings for them. It's pretty cool. This is how you would hook up a mono amplifier. The standby control, again, these are RCA jacks, even though they look different. The remote speaker, this is what we mentioned earlier, that would go to a relay box that would be controlling the outputs from the amplifier. Don't have that piece. And then some convenience outlets so we can switch the rest of the components on the stack. Just below it is the equalizer. Here it's got a potentiometer. I think this might be the first potentiometer to be found on this equipment for the output level. So you can set the output. A tape loop. Actually, they're kind of staggered, so main ins and out and tape in and out. And then the standby control, consistent with the rest of the units. Going back down, with the amplifier is pretty straightforward. Got some cool nomenclature here, specifying our 250 watts per channel from 20 hertz to 20K. Distortion at 0.025. Anyway, love seeing stuff like this printed on the units themselves. Although it must be a risky proposition for them, because if they improve this down in the production runs, they'd have to kind of rewrite the stencils, but here we go. All right, SAE 501, and this is worth noting. This is manufactured and engineered by Scientific Audio Electronics in LA, California. So the 01 we can see here is manufactured in the US, another US for the 01, same for the P01, but when we get up to the cassette deck, a little sticker here saying made in Korea. So in the 02 series is when these went overseas for manufacturing. And then the tuner also in LA, California. Over here we've got two sets of inputs, a high pass and a normal. So it looks like we've got some filters built into this particular input. Standard 5-way binding posts, which I love to see on stuff from the 80s and 90s. I hate those push terminals and every other kind of speaker terminal. This is the way to go. Thank you, SAE, for doing this. This makes our life easy and allows you to connect just about every cable out there. So check this out. I also have one of the coolest pieces of SAE literature that I've seen. This is a brochure for the 01 series. Front cover featuring a 201, which was the smaller of the amplifiers, our tuner, our equalizer, and our preamp. What's missing from here is the cassette player. But let me dive in. Scientific progress. All right, so the first section talks about the amplifiers, and it looks like there was quite an array. The first one being this massive 500 watt per channel, the A1001. So same naming convention, they've doubled, or they've summed up left and right channel outputs and acquired for the name. This thing's a beast. I understand these are super, super rare. Very, very cool. Look at the heat sinks on it. And the layout, that's a beautifully built amp. 501 is right here, that's our beast, 250 watts per channel. And there was one below that, the A201. And I think the back page shows that there was a third variation. So 201, 301, 501, and 101 at 100, 150, 250, and 500 watts. Super cool. This must have been right before they released their tape deck, because there's no mention of it in this manual. Moving on, they talk about those pesky little relays. Ironic that they sort of talked about these great gold-plated relays that are obviously an issue nowadays. Here's computer technology meets the state-of-the-art audio. So here's the preamp in question. Here's our tuner and the EQ. This is neat. Here they go in a little bit in depth about how their equalizer works. The fact that you're able to dial in exact frequency. You don't have to guess or look at or limited by the slider. You can actually punch in exact frequency you want to affect in both volume and bandwidth. So here they show the overlapping frequencies, and over here they show the fact that you can go ahead and impact the bandwidth of each of the frequencies you've chosen to modify. So pretty revolutionary for the time. The other thing that was neat, somewhere in here I saw, let me see, there's another brochure here. Check out these cool wood end caps for the series. Looks like if you're not going to rack mount them, this would have been a really nice option to have. If you've got a set of these kicking around, please leave us a comment below. I'd love to get a set to complete the system. Also a rack, if you happen to have an extra rack. I understand they made a few different models. I'd love to put this all in a rack, just like we did with our Pioneer system, which, by the way, is sitting there waiting to ship out. Someone purchased our entire Pioneer Spec series system. I'll also put a link below because it's a pretty cool system also from 1970s. It'd be good contrast to see how Pioneer decided or what their execution was compared to the previous system from SAE. Here's their receiver. Well, actually, this is their integrated amplifier in the 02 series, matched up to their tuner. So together these two pieces would make a receiver essentially. So that's a cool 1-2 punch. Yeah, it seems to be a 60 watt integrated amplifier. And this brochure is for the, yeah, this is the first mention of the, well, this is the 102 cassette. That's the one we've got here. So this is another brochure for the 102 series. And in the 102, they made a 500, yeah, a 100 and a 250 watt version. Sorry, a 100 and 250 watt version. Well, I guess they abandoned their naming convention. All right, very neat. And then we've got the manual for the tuner. This is the only manual we have, unfortunately, for this system. But pretty standard affair. I'm not going to go through with it, or go through it. All right, a few loose ends. If you like hi-fi equipment, and obviously you do if you're watching this video, and you want to hear from us on an occasional basis, every Friday we send out a mailing list, we send out an email blast to everyone on our mailing list featuring all the new products that arrived in the past week. Tend to be about somewhere between 15 and 20 of them. All this cool stuff is listed online at our website. If you want to be part of that mailing list, go to our website, and at the bottom you'll see a link to subscribe. We promise not to send any spam. We put a lot of effort into the content that we sent out, and if you're an audiophile, I really feel that you will enjoy it. You'll also notice that our shop is pretty full. It also features a couple of vehicles. We're here into cars as much as we're into audio equipment. If you're a fan of the channel, you've probably seen some of these already. This is our Lancia Delta Integrale, which just got the bottoms resprayed. Oh, by the way, if you don't like cars, this is where you want to stop this video, because we're done with the audio content. Now we're going to talk cars for a tiny bit. Lancia Delta Integrale, 92. This is my dream car from childhood. Just got back from the body shop where we painted the lower plastics that were bubbling a bit. I also did the exhaust on it, which was badly needed. It had a factory exhaust, which was unimpressive to say the least, so I bought a bypass for it, and it has just the right amount of rumble to it. It's here because I just put the plastics on it, and tomorrow we've got a car show that we're going to bring this to. Check out this interior. Fine Italian leather. Almost looks like a Gucci bag. And then up at the lift is our E36 M3, one of the lowest mileage pieces here in the country with 27,000 miles in Estoril blue. This is from 1996. And it is here because it's going to inspection. And I've got one or two things to sort out with an SRS light. And a beautiful car from 1996. I think that covers it. It's a bit of a mess here, but I hope you've enjoyed the video. Remember our website is skyfiaudio.com. Thanks for watching.